National Institute for the Blind and Action for Blind. He has knowledge of the area through his time at Ashiana BME Housing Association, Great Places, where he was deputy chair and board member. So this is a brief introduction about our esteemed speaker. And today's session is about building back better or the same, reflections on sustainability impact, systems thinking, and managing teams in the post-pandemic. So, dear participants, without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Khalil Rahman to enlighten us on the mentioned topic. Sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, I'm delighted to be here and joining you, I think, especially in these last 10 days. And I've been told, obviously, iftar is not too far away, so I'll try and be as brief and interesting as possible. I'll try and talk through for about 20 minutes and then kind of, hopefully not put you to sleep, followed by sort of an interactive sort of questions and answers. So I think in terms of the title that I was thinking about, it's really about reflecting, especially in this month that we're in, less about me and my achievements and, all the great things that have been achieved. It's, I'm hoping today's session will be really acting as a mirror to yourselves and to reflect on your ideas and thoughts and how the journey has been for you through this fantastic program, which I've had the chance to read through, and the various teams that you've been involved with. I know that the program sort of focuses on the SDGs, which I think is a great topic. And for those of you a little bit older, they were called the Millennium Development Goals. So now we're on S, and I think another 20 years as we go down the alphabet, they're probably called the ZDGs. But I think whilst these are noble aims, and the purpose of the conversation is not to sort of be critical of them. I think sometimes they themselves as a aim, as a high objective, they find, but they often become, the tunnel vision. They become the means to the ends. And I think they're useful indicators, they're useful objectives and aims, but at the end of the day, we have to still focus on what's in front of our eyes, what's going on. And then some cynics talk about the SDGs being, aims or created by rich white people to keep everyone else, comforted and to give us hope at the end of the day. But, on a very serious note, there have been some great successes. But I think now with COVID and the pandemic, a lot of the great progress that's been made around human development, economic development, it's really at a bit of a risk. So what I want to try and do was bring in two aspects. One is kind of reflecting on this discussion around Build Back Better, which I'm sure you've been hearing about in the media. And then also within the SDG kind of domain, you're hearing a lot of terminology around social and impact entrepreneurship, sustainability, and this whole idea, I think, which I hear about many younger people talking about being the sort of next digital unicorn or the next digital sort of tech emperor, and these kind of things. But I think whilst all of this is around using COVID as a kind of opportunity to reset or redesign, which is fantastic. But I think we also have to balance that with the realities of where things are going. So I'm going to sort of quickly go through a fairly short presentation, and the idea really is to set the scene for some of this thinking that we've got. So I'm going to try and quickly move into sharing a screen, and hopefully should work. So can you see, is everybody able to see a screen? Somebody shout out.
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Yeah. So, one of the And I picked this particular picture because I'm sure you'll understand that, over the last couple of weeks, the pandemic hasn't really left some places. It's arrived with real vengeance. And this is in India, what's going on in the last couple of weeks. And I've been paying close attention with this, and also within other countries, and recently I was asked to do a project on Lebanon as well. And when you sort of contrast the impact of the pandemic and other economic instability, it really brings home that it's how much is affecting the common person, the person on the street. So that's kind of really why I picked this picture. And I thought, with what's going on there, irrespective of your religion or faith and background, what we're seeing is really revelations in the sense of the reality of those who have hope, of systems, of governments, of politics, and people who are abandoned, who are abandoned by those in power, who are unable or unwilling to help and to assist. And where the real joy has also come out of this has been the number of normal people that try to help each other. So there's amazing examples of collaboration, of help, of assistance internally within the country, and the same in Lebanon, which I've been looking at over the last couple of weeks as well. So it kind of really offers a lot of food, for thought, for reflection on this. So I'll just if I can move onto the next slide. So I'm going to really talk about sort of a couple of themes here around sustainability, impact, the idea of that, all of those variables within systems, and then kind of managing teams, the whole aspect of leadership. And hopefully I'll be able to sort of bring all of those together. So I just wanted to really give you a quick background as to why I'm in a sort of reflective perspective, not just because it's Ramadan, because it is a period of reflection and thinking. But I've kind of had the last 10, 15 years working my way through developing countries and the issues of poverty, of poor health. So I worked in places, as you can see, in Congo, built a hospital. I worked in delivering maternal health, eye health. So I've become very familiar with not just the health issues, but the wider economic development issues that are going on. And alongside that, I kind of experienced a lot of the major humanitarian issues that have been happening as well over the last sort of 10 years or even before. So there was a tsunami, a Kashmir earthquake, which kind of got me interested in humanitarian work. But then, East Africa famine over in Somalia, in Kenya. And then in the last decade, you've got Syria and Lebanon. So through this kind of journey of going around and working in these countries and trying to deliver impact, really, at the end of the day, to change people's lives, to improve their well-being, there were just so many questions which kept going through my mind as to why isn't there a change? Why is it always the kind of having to fix these issues? And I saw in the sort of NGO, charity, philanthropic world, a big rush of funding, of money coming in, and lots of questions. And as I got towards the end of my time in working in the kind of global development context, I thought I need to get some answers. I need to try and reflect on this. So I ended up actually going back to school. So I went to explore some answers at Harvard. And very interestingly, I was very, very fortunate to get into INSEAD, which is one of the sort of premier business schools, with a focus really on social change, on entrepreneurship, and social impact. And that really opened my eyes to help make sense of why these wicked problems, that's what we call them, wicked problems, had become complex wicked problems, how they were interlinked, and how people were trying to try and solve them. What could they do? So I think that kind of knowledge and networks has been really powerful. And really on the back of that, around 2018, a group of us created Medisina, not just as to deliver and focus on healthcare, but actually to look at social investment, to channel money and funds into great ideas that were essentially kind of low cost but maximum impact, so we could stretch the funding into delivering a more long-term impact. So that's kind of, and also actually one of the things was around helping pass on the skills. There's a whole group of younger people out there who really interested, who can see what's going on, and they want to do something. So the idea of Medisina was to try and help pass on those skills. I also actually, although there was a great introduction, I'm now involved in the UK National Health System. I'm a main board director of a number of health organisations. So the National Health System here in the United Kingdom has 134 organisations which kind of make up its parts. And so I'm with the sort of team of directors responsible for healthcare for I think nearly about 1 million people. We have nearly over 12,000 staff and probably around $1 billion, $1 billion of expenditure here in the UK. So that's kind of been an interesting journey as well, of learning during the pandemic of how healthcare systems have responded. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about the background. And I think some of the things around sustainability that I've want to share with you and reflect on is in terms of the intentionality. So you hear around social enterprise, impact driven. There's a whole stuff around business with purpose, compassionate capitalism, etc. But I think when you're looking to deliver some change and looking to deliver some sustainability, you've got to put yourself in a particular model. Whether you're a charity or NGO driven, are you just going to be a traditional business, or what do you call a sustainable business? So I think the intention there matters, because sometimes the intention starts with, it's around making an impact, not necessarily around making a profit. And then it starts to, as you're faced with challenges and issues of trade-offs, it moves to having a pressure around profits, around return, as more people come on board with investment or ideas to move things forward. But I think sustainability in the SDG context, some researcher came up with this idea of where you're in an area of political instability, of economic instability, be a camel, obviously our famous friend out there, where we focus not on scale and growth, but we also have to focus on resilience and sustainability. We have to look at the idea of how capital is defined. Is it just about money? Is it about human capital, relational capital, where we use networks, we use collaboration to help deliver that idea or the plan that you're wanting to change? So I think that's the issue of sustainability is quite important, because if you're copying the Silicon Valley model of growth and change and be big and stuff, that doesn't really work very well if you're in the Sahel region, if you're in Chad or Senegal, where people are struggling to even get electricity. The other concept of impact, I think, is quite important, because what does it mean, and what kind of impact are we trying to measure? And again, these are extracts from one of my great professors who's an amazing guy, really, of help pulling things together. And we have to look at the depth of impact, which is around, how much we're changing people's lives, not just the amount of people that we're looking to impact or to support. You're looking at how deep do we go into their into supporting them. So in healthcare, we know that the majority of health problems are actually not related. They're social determinants. They're related to economy, the housing, poverty, these kind of issues. So the depth of impact matters at the end of the day, and obviously the duration as well. How long do we stay involved in trying to make that impact. So these are kind of a couple of the equations that have been flying around, and I think for organizations and NGOs or civil society organization or social entrepreneurs, this is again another important area to think about of where are the trade-offs, where is the challenge for the organization. I'll give you an example. That there's an organization called Natakallam, which is taking a really interesting approach on language training. So if you're interested in learning a language, there's many platforms out there, and the lady behind it, who's decided that she was going to use a significant, resource out there, which was refugees. So Syrian refugees, and others who had a great understanding of language, etc. So she linked in with them to deliver language support and training, remotely across the world. Now, for her, the issue wasn't necessarily around, or as I understood it, wasn't around growing to be massive, to be having a huge scale. It was really much more around that depth of impact and to be able to stay focused on the mission. So the mission was to help support or utilize the intellectual capital, the skills of refugees, not to be the biggest language provider, in the world. So these are the kind of some of the challenges, I think, around impact. And those trade-offs that I've talked about matter, profit. What do you measure as success? Is it just about outputs? Is it just about, well, we helped 15,000 people, but then how do you change their lives? So these are some of the thoughts. Now, I think in all of this dynamic, the issue is, who are you helping? Who is being impacted by that change? And I think there's a lot of animated discussion, because in social change, the issue is, if you imagine the pyramid there, at the top of the pyramid, you have the elites, you have those who are rich and wealthy, and at the bottom, you have people living less than $2 a day or even less. And is the intervention, is what you're designing, is it actually impacting on the top part of the pyramid? So are you actually increasing the inequalities, the gap between the rich and the poor? So who benefits from the bottom of the pyramid? And alongside impact is around innovation, and those ideas, which I'm sure you've been covering in your teams. Ann-Mei Chang, who's an ex-Google executive, who's written a fantastic book called Lean Impact. So she kind of comes up with these catchphrases of, innovation is the path, impact is the destination. And I think a fantastic line she uses is, love the problem, not your solution. So if you're an engineer, you'll have some difficulties around that, because we get preoccupied with the technology and the platforms, but actually it's the problems that we're trying to solve, those kind of wicked problems, we call them. And then kind of finally, around the third part of the triangle is around systems. And I'm sure you've been discussing this, but the issue really here is trying to understand the change that you're trying to make, the impact that you're trying to make, and the events that are happening. There's always some interlink, there's always some connectedness, there's patterns that are there, and there's structures that enable those problems, those wicked problems, to exist. And we could say, those structures are political, they're economic, and they're there. And in terms of understanding where you're trying to make that change, you've got to sort of have a mental model of how all of that links in. And system thinking, I think, is probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, that when you're trying to go in and solve a problem or trying to fix a problem, be it healthcare, be it help mothers deliver babies, you've got to really understand the ecosystem that you're in on a macro level, not just the system at the micro level of the solution you've come up with, but actually where do you sit? Where does your solution sit within the wider system and the politics and the economic system that you're going on? Because as you try and implement, you'll run into challenges of sustainability. What if you have to, in Lebanon, overcome, let's say, for example, a lot of bureaucracy? How do you deal with that? So you've got to understand where your intervention where your change that you're planning sits within the system, and how you can innovate, how you can get further than that. And then finally, really, sort of in terms of my reflections around over the last year or so and beyond is, if once you're trying to develop your intervention, you're trying to deliver it, it doesn't succeed, doesn't matter how good the technology is, without you understanding how to sort of manage and lead teams. So the idea of leadership, but then you've got to match that with values, your culture and behaviors. I think combining those sort of things together help you on the journey in terms of solving complex problems. So that's kind of really in a nutshell the key points of the presentation. You can certainly contact me and stuff, but what I wanted to do was come back in and give you some further thoughts around what I think in terms of this Build Back Better and you know where we're at. But before I do that, I just want to give a little bit more emphasis on the issue of teams and, you know, learning to work with people. I, you know, live in the United Kingdom. I'm a minority here. Perhaps many of you who are in part of this talk, you know, you're not a minority. I have no idea. But when you're a minority in a country, it gives you a different exposure, different ideas and different thoughts of how things are going on. And the ability to get on with people really matters, the ability to get the best out of them. And probably one of the biggest reflections for me over many, many years has been how important it is to be inclusive, to be mindful of existing cultures. So, you know, the difference between men and women, how you treat women, how you value them and empower them, understanding those dynamics, they matter. And especially if you're, you know, working across many, many different countries. And if you're leading that team, you have this additional responsibility of managing those dynamics. And I think one of the key things to highlight with you is around feedback. You know, one of the things that I think is really important is to get feedback from your team and from beyond of what perhaps isn't going well, how you're performing, how you're doing, have that self-awareness. And importantly, within the teams, you know, managing trust. So these are kind of some of the dynamics, which I think whether you're on a virtual team world or whether you're physical, that I think matters. And these are, you know, I think some of the lessons that I've picked up. Now, in terms of closing, sort of bringing it together, I come back to sort of the beginning of my talk, you know, build back better, you know, or the same. I think the reality is, if you look at the system that we're in, if you look at what's going on around the world, I think for some, we will build back better. And that's maybe more of a Western concept in highly developed economies. We will build back better. You know, for others, it'll be build back the same because they want to go back to what was before. But I think for many, it will build back for worse. Why do I say that? Well, you know, the pandemic has offered opportunities, and it's not just offered opportunities for redesign or reset, but actually for people to be opportunistic, to make money, to seek their own advantage, to further their own goals. And you know, clearly, if you look at many countries around, you know, we're expecting millions and millions of people to go back into severe poverty, you know, whereas over the last decade, people have moved forward. So we have to be really crystal clear about that reality, and it's got to be dealt with. And I think, you know, yourselves as teams and people who've been working on this program, perhaps some of that responsibility falls on your shoulders, that there is a reality that's quickly, you know, developing in front of us of many, many millions, hundreds of millions of people that are not going to build back better. So I think whilst I thought there's the kind of the 3 T's of this program, Ta'aruf, Ta'awun, Tahrum. We also got to have the power of C, you know, which is around compassion, collaboration, and a sense of curiosity, you know, to dig deeper behind the scenes. So I hope with that kind of awareness, we also have to have hope at the end of the day. And if it means that, you know, we remind ourselves, you know, of the message of this month, that's, you know, we don't leave others behind. You know, we walk together, you know, side by side, you know, share alike in that journey, so that you know, we reach sort of the best destination. So thank you very much for listening. I'm very sorry I had to race through that, and I hope it's given you some ideas and thoughts. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khalil, for this fruitful presentation and well-structured talk and insights. And now I would like to open the floor for the questions from our audience, if they have. You can just raise your hand and I will give you the floor. Okay, I don't see any participants addressing questions. Then I will ask my questions, Dr. Khalil.
Sure.
So my question is, how the humanitarian work was affected by the pandemic, and in which level there was a shift in dealing with the humanitarian activities?
In one way, it's had a significant effect. I mean, certainly from my point of view, you know, we're not able to travel as much. So some of the work that's going on in East Africa, whatever, but then that's the power of having great teams, of having great people and giving them that training so that, you know, you can work remotely. But there is a serious challenge ahead. And the United Kingdom, unfortunately, is contributing that challenge, where funding is being cut. So there's a huge amount of money, really significant amounts of funding, which in the last couple of weeks, the government has announced that it will not be putting in foreign aid. You know, it won't be working anymore to send money or, you know, support programs in a lot of the low to middle income countries. When you recognize that sort of challenge, and I don't think the United Kingdom is the only country that will be doing this, it's going to have a huge impact on the local economies and the local people, and you know, the people are going to have to adapt. Countries will have to adapt, and I think this sets a really interesting dynamic, because there's one argument within aid work and humanitarian, which is that, you know, the money is charity, you know, it's sadaqah, and we give it and it makes an impact. But there's a kind of another part of thinking, which is what I've tried to share around, that the money is capital, and to use that capital to make some sort of sustainable change at the end of the day. So how can you use it better? How can it be used wiser? And how can it be used perhaps in less corrupt ways? So I think there's definitely a big challenge there. But it isn't just about, you know, the response of the West. I think this is also demonstrating what we call the emperor's new clothes, you know, of local governments. And you know, India, unfortunately, is one of those examples. Even in the United Kingdom, in the first part of the pandemic, it was a mess. You know, we hundreds, 150,000 people have died. So it's not that one country is better than the other. I think the issue is that over the next 5 years, there's going to be huge impact on a realignment of nations' interests, you know, and unfortunately, geopolitics can't be subtracted from the pandemic, because it is being combined together, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Tekang. Tekang, you have the floor. Can you open the microphone, please?
Okay. Hey, sir. Thanks very much for the brilliant explanation. It was quite interesting. And permit me to try to ask you some few questions. And my first question goes to the issue of vaccine diplomacy. There's this much talk about globalization and the benefit of globalization by all states and sharing the cost. With the outbreak of the pandemic and with the discovery of the vaccine by certain states, it's become like a vaccine diplomacy in the diplomatic field and equally vaccine nationalism. Sorry, we got refugees, we got migrants, and we got minorities staying in countries who got these vaccines. How do we reconcile these? What should these states do? So what they preach, they definitely have to practice. Probably my second question is based about the works of intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. I want to focus on NGOs, which are kind of privately funded, privately owned by certain individuals. Over the years, a lot of these NGOs have been doing good work. Some of them have been probably not using the funds meant for the execution of projects. And now, within the past 2 years, they've been caught up with this virus. Fundings are not coming from the donor states. Some of them have been reduced. And you just mentioned the fact about the UK. Don't you think that some of these organizations have to do what we call kind of in-house sourcing among themselves? They could be working, they could be sharing or contributing a bit of what they got, rather than relying so much about from donation. Probably my third question is, I find this kind of very offending in the sense that I want to use the term the West, because if I have to use my geography map, I don't see the West is, I don't see the West on the upside, it's the North. I see the North, the South, the East, and probably the West, but we call them the West. And they say we down here are developing states. Probably a couple of years ago, they used to use the term, they used to use this very derogatory term about third world states. They fine-tune it to developing states. They fine-tune it to South states of the South or global South. I find this a bit problematic, because if you look at the issue of the coronavirus, most of these states, which they do call developing states, don't have the number of those infected, don't have the number of deaths. I think something has to be done in probably to change the connotation. And I leave it to you, and I want to get your thoughts about this. Apart from India, which is suffering from it now, and if you ask my own opinion, I want to say that the Indians, the masses, didn't respect the government when the government begged them not to go out during the last something feast they got. I followed it, and they went out, and now they're in the shit, and now they are accusing the government and all the like. So I want to get your thoughts on these three issues. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Now that's a good range of questions that you've put to me. I think starting with vaccine diplomacy and the whole concept there, my view is that don't assume the pandemic is over. It's not an automatic assumption that suddenly, the vaccines are going to solve the problem, because we don't really quite know what's around the corner. Who would have thought a year ago that you'd have mutations, or variants of concern, all these kind of things that are going on. So, if you believe obviously in a higher power and in what the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, let's not try and second guess that at the end of the day that everything is sort of going to end very quickly as soon as the vaccines are distributed. We just don't know. But I think the point you raise around vaccine diplomacy and what's going on, it's a really serious one. And if anything, my reflection on it is that, well, actually, it's just showing you, the power structures, who has the power, who doesn't have the power, and who's, in a weaker position and who's in a stronger position. And it's also showing at the deeper level what could be really one of the symptoms of COVID, which is this idea of, focusing less on common humanity, but actually on, America first, or, Britain first, or whatever, that kind of nationalism. So I agree with you. I think it's really disappointing to see countries play the vaccine thing. And it's not, if I may use the word, it's not the West as well. You know, we have many, you know, who those countries are who are involved in sort of trying to push their vaccines ahead of the welfare of their own populations. But the other issue is around that the pharmaceutical companies, you know, the existing systems that exist. So there's a challenge for them, you know, how do they sort of let go of the way they've done things before? So I think there's some issues around the intellectual property and these rights. But I just also want to kind of draw your attention to the fact that sometimes things are not what they seem. So, you know, people talk about being one of the vaccines, you know, developed in, being manufactured in India, the AstraZeneca one, you know, oh, it's license free, or it's been done for not for profit. But actually, if you look at then the companies that are involved in their manufacture, there's a lot of money that's flying around. So it's a tough one. I don't really have any clear answers other than I wish there would be no vaccine diplomacy, there'd be vaccine freedom, but that's just not the way things are working out. On your second question around NGOs funding and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I'm so with you on this. I think that, you know, NGOs have had an opportunity over the last 10, 15 years or more to make sustainable impact, to make some changes. And yes, it has succeeded in some instances, but in others, it's just been a transplantation, you know, of ideology, of, you know, colonialism, of attitudes, of, you know, bringing things over to countries and making them work there. I think the future has to be local. It has to be around local people, local ideas. And if the outside world has a role to play, it's got to be around being more free with capital. It's got to be more understanding and interesting of how to fund the local work in a much more sustainable way. So I think that, you know, that's why in the kind of build back better social entrepreneurship impact domain, NGOs have a place, but actually people see that in, you know, most developing countries, the market is the driver. You know, it's market forces. There's no welfare system in Chad. You know, there's no welfare system in Senegal. People have to survive. So the solutions have to be coming, you know, locally. So that's kind of the second point. The third point is around language and terminology. Yeah, I mean, I apologize if I'm being very narrow on this. But yeah, I mean, it's changed. You have the global south, you have the global north, you have, you know, lower middle income countries, different terminologies, which, you know, have their benefits and so forth. I don't have a particular view on it really. I think it's using the descriptions as appropriate for the countries that you're trying to work with. But I do think that COVID and the pandemic is a challenge for local politicians and local political structures in the countries that are being affected. You might say in Africa, well, you know, maybe not a lot of people are dying, which is great. Assuming that you know that they're dying, because in a lot of countries you don't have systems to understand how many people are dying and where they're dying. But the impact may not be directly from the virus, but the indirect impacts, you know, people, the tourism, all the rest of it is having a huge impact. So I think on that point, you know, it's going to demonstrate to you the strength and the understanding of these political structures and economic structures, because normally these structures are created to advance a particular group. You know, it's for elites to widen the gap. They're now facing a challenge of, well, actually, a lot of people below us who are not so rich and wealthy, like take Lebanon, for example, are suddenly becoming incredibly poor. They're suffering. Now, what do we do, you know, as the elites, as the political structures? Do we run, or do we actually have to now pay attention to the fact that we have to look after our peoples, those people who may have, you know, used democracy or whatever to vote themselves in? So I think it's not a problem or a challenge solely just for the developed countries. It's a real issue for the countries, that are low to middle income, that are having huge economic impacts, as a challenge for their political structures. So I hope that kind of answers in a way, but yeah, I hope that kind of answers your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil. Because of time limitation and our colleagues in Qatar are having iftars in few minutes, I would like to ask the participant to make the questions very brief and direct. And we have...
There's a question from Vinod actually on the chat room, which says that, in sort of UK, India, Brazil, they're obviously stressed. So how optimistic am I that this is only a temporary and passing phase? I'm optimistic. I think we will get through this, but we just have to live. We'll just have to learn to live with the fact that there are diseases and illnesses that will come back to bite us if we are not careful, or if we don't pay attention to what's going around. Right. So there's a question from Dana.
Yes, Dana Ismail. Dana, you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. And thank you very much for the interesting talk. It was really insightful for me. I just, my question is in a bit of a different angle, different area. So in situations like the Syria conflict, the Syrian conflict, where we have these like long-term refugees, I doubt if we actually can call them refugees anymore, but they are classified internationally as refugees, residing in Lebanon and Jordan, and having all these burdens on the government's resources that are already like are already limited anyways in Jordan or in Lebanon. So from the view that the main obstacle towards sustainability is basically like the emergencies, the crisis, the man-made crisis, I would say. How do you, when is enough for the relief aid and the emergency and the immediate aid that is going for the past 10 to 15 years? When enough is enough, and when are we going to move to making people normalize their lives and rebuild their lives and just go back to the normal rhythm, so we can start actually thinking about the sustainability instead of just like putting all these like financial resources and financial aid into what we call emergency aid? How can we move to sustainability if it's ongoing thing? The government policies, the administration of these governments, they are refusing to giving citizenships to refugees, and everyone is so scared of the nightmare of the Palestinians being repeated again with the Syrians, although the Syrians, I think, much worse. They are lost. They are not even like us, stateless refugees, and they are in a different era. When enough is enough, and how can we force governments and force states and force communities to accept that we cannot give international immediate emergency aid for 20 years and then talk about sustainability and why we are not achieving sustainability? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, it's thank you. I think we'll be talking well past iftar if I try and give you a more in-depth response to that. It's an area close to my heart as well, because clearly, you know, I've also been witnessing and you know, being involved in that whole dimension. The reality is this, that there are just, you know, those in power don't feel the need to do anything or unable to do anything, and perhaps there's a dynamic here that, well, you know, richer countries will sort of contribute, you know, as you quite rightly say, you know, it just becomes like the sort of Palestinian issue of a lifetime of never-ending aid and support. And, you know, Yemen would be another example as well. And these are all man-made issues. very, very complex. This is why they call them very complex, wicked problems, because there is no binary response. There are incremental solutions and ideas that can make a difference, like you say, in terms of basic human rights, of status, of recognition. But you know, the structures there that exist are not interested. And one of the biggest reflections I've had over the whole issue of the Syrian crisis, and being also here in, you know, in the kind of West, in the kind of non-Muslim domain, has been Europe saw, I don't know, 1 million, 2 million refugees trying to make its way. They went obviously in the immediate neighbors, Jordan, but how come they didn't go the way of, you know, the Muslim family, the you know, the big Muslim family? Why didn't they go towards the Gulf? Why didn't they go into other countries where you could probably say they wouldn't be a minority? Why did they want to come towards the West, you know, into Germany and all these kind of places? So that was just a kind of, you know, I'm answering your question with another question. So I don't have an answer. I think it reflects on the state that we're in, the state of, you know, various countries and where they're at. And I think these programs that you guys are involved with, these are fantastic. You know, this is really where you're going to take ownership. It's going to be locally driven, and hopefully that can make a change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil. I think we don't have any questions.
One more, if I may,
okay, sure,
as the organizers, actually, let's say, you know, they in some tournaments they have the wild card, right? So I want to use our wild card. So I want to thank Mr. Khalil Rahman for joining our event, and I'm so sorry, because of some health problems I cannot open my camera. I have some problems with my eyes right now. And but I want to ask you a very, very minor question. In the past, like maybe 2 weeks or so, I have been addicted to a TV show on Netflix called New Amsterdam.
Yes.
Yeah. And the famous doctor there, Max Goodwin, actually keeps inquiring or criticizing, or let's say attacking the American health system, and he kind of brings back the attention on the public hospitals and the very essence of why public hospitals should actually be there for people. But it's happening in a very wildly capitalist country. So my question is, if anything is going to change in the world in terms of the way health is going to be a public good, do you believe that it should emerge from a place like US or global, or where do you see the nexus of a change in a systemic way, geographically, actually?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and thank you for picking that up. You know, for me, my own view is, you know, along with other dimensions of sort of humanity, you know, good health is a basic human right. The American model is actually what has been copied across many countries across the world, whether it appears obvious or whether it doesn't appear obvious. That is the predominant mode of delivering, you know, healthcare. It's very financially driven, and yes, there are public systems in place in many countries. I'll take Lebanon as an example. You know, in Lebanon, the medications are all branded, for example. You know, they don't really allow generic medicines in there, etc. So it's where systems are set up for financial power and financial gain, less around fixing people's health. And that's some of the weaknesses in the US system which exist. They are the ones that have been copied across most countries, you know, out there. And I do think that, you know, the US is also a great enabler of change. And there are changes that I think will happen over the next couple of years. So I'm quite optimistic. The question is whether other countries will feel that they want to do the same, because there are vested interests, you know, at the end of the day. So my own, quickly in terms of my own experience, you know, there's a big tension between hospital-based care, you know, versus healthcare in the community. And in many countries that I've worked in, the power of communities and individuals has really, you know, been the only way that people can get some sense of good health. And then you get, you know, the hospitals out there that are just, even if they are private, I can't compete with the private sector because it's all about making money. So yeah, that's it's a good point, but I'm optimistic. You know, Qatar is a good example of the approach, the Hamad Corporation. So yeah, I'm optimistic.
Thank you so much for your wonderful perspective and your sharing your wisdom with us and in Design Post-COVID Humanity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil Rahman, for this informative and interesting talk. It was a wonderful session, and we are looking forward to meet you in other programs, inshallah. Also, I would like to thank our audience for attending this session and for making it very interactive and for the very deep questions. And I would like to also thank our amazing team of Design Post-COVID Humanity from Qatar, Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar, and from ICYF for their support and efforts. Thank you very much for the productive cooperation. Have a nice iftar and see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.